Hi, guys. Welcome to the Simple Doesn't Mean Easy podcast. We are here weekly working at simplifying things in our lives, one step at a time, one day at a time. I'm your host, Michelle Visser, and it has been a crazy last 3 or 4 weeks around here. Sugar season had started up and then it slowed down and then it started up again. And I was in the midst of putting final touches on something I have been working on really religiously for almost a year now. It's been a huge project for me. I did mention it a few episodes ago, but I haven't really talked about it. But it is time, and I'm so excited to talk more about this topic that I have been studying, researching, delving into in a very personal, physical level. I'm talking about fresh flour. So today's episode, we're going to talk some more, I should say, about the history of flour in our country. We started talking about that history a few episodes ago. I think it was 157 when Gary Levitt, the president of Nutrimil, came on. By the way, that episode has gone viral over on Instagram. If you haven't checked out that episode, it's a good one to go back and listen to. 157. There's a part in it where Gary talks about what ingredients make up a very popular common conditioner that they use in the commercial bread industry. And well, it's a soundbite that people have kind of gone crazy over, one direction or the other. I have fanaticals who are insisting that it is just a conspiracy theory and we are insane. We must believe in aliens too. And then I have the other side of the spectrum, folks like myself, who are just disgusted that this is a reality. And I guarantee you it is. I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to tell you go listen to 157. Trust me, it's a good listen and it's one everybody should listen to. um, you know what? I can't just leave it at that, can I? I can't just do that. I'll tell you. Gary talked about duck feathers and human hair and how and why they are used to make commercial bread. It's true. Okay. Anyway, we talked a little bit with Gary about the history of flour, but I want to dive into it more from a different angle in this episode. And I also want to talk about a study that was done with rats that I think you're going to be shocked. I know I was the more I read about this study. So that's the main gist, I think, of today's episode. So I think you're going to like this. I think it's going to give you some insights you haven't thought of before. So join me as we talk about fresh flour. Before we dive into this episode, I want you to go check out solelyrested.com/fresh for a couple reasons. At that page, solelyrested.com/fresh, you can sign up if you haven't already for all my free resources and information all about fresh flour. You can also see everything I've written in different categories about this topic. And below that, I explain to you a couple really important lids that I use and strongly recommend for storing wheat berries. And those lids are both available through one of my absolute favorite places to shop for things like that, True Leaf Market. But you want to go to solelyrested.com/fresh for the links to these particular lids that I love and for a discount code that's only available a few more weeks. So definitely go take advantage of that really sweet discount. Solelyrested.com/fresh. Okay, so let's step back a few years. I was busy doing all the right things. Well, that's not true. That sounds so pompous. That is not what I meant. I was busy really, really wanting to do all the right things when it came to real food about a decade ago. But I also knew I only knew so much. In fact, it's amazing looking back how little I knew then, honestly. But I knew one step at a time, and I just did one little thing at a time. And it made me feel so good about so many things. But the really crazy thing is, year after year of doing just that, never once did it cross my mind to think about the very basic ingredient like probably the most important ingredient in my kitchen, something that I use daily. It just never even crossed my mind to think about my flour. I was using, not even religiously though, I really didn't think it was overly important, but I was trying to use the unbleached organic flour when I could get my hands on it, when it wasn't too overly expensive, when I didn't feel like I was strapped on my budget that month, when I was at the grocery store, add all those factors together. And if I could, I would get what I thought was the best flour. But I had no idea that it was literally a dead flower. No matter how much I spent on it, no matter how quote unquote good it was because it was organic and unbleached, it was dead. And I had no idea. I got my first grain mill because a company asked if they could send it to me for me to try it out. I can't tell you how thankful I am that they did that because I don't know how long it would have taken me to even think about flour if it wasn't for that. But I struggled so much with that grain mill. I just couldn't get my flour the right consistency, and I really struggled with the end results. I mean, the bread that I used to bake, way too many times I literally threw it away. It was horrible. It was such a brick, and nobody wanted to eat it. And my cookies were really runny, like literally filling up the tray instead of being cookies. They would just run all over the tray. It was just horrible. Like I really, really struggled with fresh flour. And it didn't dawn on me back then. It's a whole different ballgame because fresh flour is all three parts of the wheat berry. It's the real thing, like real food, the way it was intended, versus the dead flour at our store. So I guess I should just start getting into what I mean by dead flour. But the thing is, I should say too, once I figured out, and it took me like 7 years of trial and error and frustration, but once I decided that's it, I'm either going to give my grain mills away or I'm going to really figure this out. It probably took me over a year of nonstop determination and trying and testing different recipes and tweaking different things until I got to the point that I was ready to never buy store bought flour again and simply use my fresh flour. And I was really, really happy with the results. And that's the point that I decided to create Fresh Flour University because I knew this was kind of life changing, groundbreaking things that everybody needed to know to get the most value out of the most essential ingredient in their kitchen. So, but it turns out we have the power to improve our food at its very core. It's just that we've forgotten the old art of real flour from a century ago. Even in the midst of modern technology, when we have at our disposal a foot high appliance that can sit on our kitchen counter and replace that giant 1,000-pound millstone that used to be required to make flour. Even though we have that, we just can't figure out why it's that important. And it seems inconvenient and it seems such a pain if our results don't turn out the way we expect the first time. So we don't know how, as a society, to truly harness the power of the wheat berry. And it makes me really sad. And why have we lost this? Like, why do we have no idea about the value of wheat as it's intended, as it was grown in the field? I'll tell you why. It all comes down to money because there is too much money to be made by big food if we even think about relearning the art of fresh, real milled flour. Too much money would be lost. And big food doesn't want that to happen. But it's a shame that as a culture, we have taken foods that are naturally full of nutrients and flavor and that offer this amazing texture. And we've decided that that's too weedy. That's a weird taste. And instead, we want literally the bland, void of nutrient, uniform, always taste the same, stick to the roof of your mouth kind of texture and flavor. And it's all because of marketing. Big Food is so brilliant at marketing. They sink billions of dollars into marketing every year, and they have the best marketers. They always have, since back in the 1940s and 50s when they were touting the benefits of Wonder Bread. Um, and I think their slogan was it 12 ways they build a strong body or something like that. I don't know. The marketers are suave and they know what to say to convince us that we don't even want to think about having at our disposable, at our disposable, at our disposal, literally the power to harness all the nutrition in this teeny tiny wheat berry. But I hope that that's changing. I think there is a flower revolution going on. I see a lot of people very interested in it and a lot of people talking about it. Okay, that's not true. Not a lot. Um, on social media, when you get down a certain tunnel and you look up certain things, that's kind of all you see. So on my social media feed, there's a lot of people talking about fresh flower, but in reality, it's probably maybe 7 or 8 accounts that I see that mention it sometimes. So a lot is definitely an exaggeration on my part, but it is getting better. And that makes me very happy that people are starting to want to know more about it. But let's talk about the history. Let me pull up my notes here. Okay. So essentially, we have been lied to, and not inconsequentially, but like in huge ways. And it's been literally for a century or more. It wasn't, I don't think it's an intentional, conspiracy against our health. I just think there's a lot of people making big money off processed food and they want us to use processed flour. And I don't know. People also get hung up on, well, how expensive would it be to do it myself? And I see a lot of people get hung up on, well, gray mill is so expensive. But, I feel like I could do a whole episode just about that. Maybe I should. I think that is a really worthy topic and a really big difficulty to help people get over. It's a hurdle, I think, for a lot of people. Um, but okay, let's just start with flour used to be a local food. That's the way it was meant to be. It was grown locally, the wheat, and then the grains were ground at a nearby mill. We talked about that a lot back in episode 157, what that looked like, how it worked. And all the families in the area would come to this miller. He would grind their grains that they grew in their fields and they would use it quickly. Everybody knew you don't keep flour around. You don't want to keep it around. It's going to get bugs or you're going to have problems and it's just going to go bad because, well, I'll tell you why in a minute. But fresh flour has a very short shelf life. It turns out they didn't know this back then. They just knew it had a short shelf life. But it turns out it's actually good that they would use it quickly and not store it up because right after it's milled is when fresh flour has the highest level of nutrition, like through the roof amounts of nutrients, right after that wheat berry has been ground into flour. The longer that it sits, 6 hours, 24 hours, 72 hours, those nutrients start to degrade. So it's good that they knew, oh, we want to finish up this flour in a week or two and then we'll go get more because they were eating a more nutritious variety of that flour if they were eating it fresh. But everybody understood flour was not shelf stable and they were fine with that. It worked. It wasn't a problem. But then there was a roller mill that was invented, a steel roller mill, and everything changed because this contraption would allow the millers to very quickly separate the three parts of the wheat berry. So the three parts are the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. Those first two parts have fats in them. And those parts, the bran and the germ, they are what keep the flour from being shelf stable. So the millers, now that they had the steel mill, could remove those two parts. And all of a sudden, voila, they had this amazing, what they thought was amazing, super, super fine white flour. Well, they made it white by bleaching it too, but that's that was the start of it. And I'll tell you why it's super fine because they've taken out the parts of the wheat berry that are sharp edged. And when there's no sharp edged bran in the flour, then the gluten has nothing breaking it up. and you just have, the starch in the endosperm. So it's going to be a really fine flour that makes for a really light bread. And let's see, it was 1880 that John Stevens was awarded the US patent for his grain crushing roller. And not long after that, the bran and the germ were pretty much ousted from flour forever to never return, except for those, crazy granola crunching people in the 60s and 70s who realized they could buy personal grain mills. So there were a few pockets of people around the country who were being complete rebels and making their own flour. But except for those very few people, I don't know why I said that. Those, except for those very few people, there was there was no flour available anywhere that had anything in it except for starch. Now they did add to it, and we'll get to that. But the new pure white novelty flour of the early 1900s was able to keep for an incredible amount of time. And of course, grandma thought that was great, right? Anybody who lived at that time thought, wow, this is amazing. I can keep my flour for years and years. I don't have to go to the mill every other week. And also look at it. Look how fine it is. I can make better breads, quote unquote, better. Um, so the nutrient dense, really flavorful flour became something that only the poor people would use. And actually, my grandma would fall into that category. My grandparents were poor rural farmers back during the Depression in rural West Virginia. And while everybody in the suburban homes across the country were enjoying this enriched, well, I guess I have to look up when the enrichment started. We'll get to that. They were enjoying this white, wonderful, quote unquote, flour. My grandparents didn't have access to that either because it was too long of a drive to go to the store to get that, or it just was more expensive for them to buy that than to continue growing their own wheat. So the poor folks were the only ones using the really good flours. That dark flour was considered the common man's flour. And you see, this is where marketing took over. They stole the narrative and they made the light flour that was able to easily make really light breads and cakes. They made that all the rage with their wonderful marketing. So what about the other two parts of the flour that the steel mills were removing? Don't worry, the flour industry very quickly learned that it could make even more money by selling that good stuff that they took from the flour. And instead of feeding us with nutritious flour, they took the bran and the germ and they made it into animal foods and seed oils and other things that were actually bad for us because of what they did to process that bran and the germ further on. So, the refined flour that folks were flocking to buy became the same flour that is in our grocery stores today. But there is a difference that we're going to get to, like I said, in a minute. It had almost eternal shelf life, and that's simply because everything nutritious was stripped away from it. The just endosperm flour that most of us are used to is pure starch, whereas true whole wheat flour that has all three parts of the wheat berry is a complex, incredibly nutritious blend of protein and starch and fats and minerals. All the good stuff if you're using fresh whole wheat flour. So, to illustrate how it impacts us, that these nutrients or lack thereof impact our health, I want to tell you about that study that I mentioned with rats. Before I do that, I want to pause and I want to make sure that you know about a special page, soullyrested.com/soil, SOIL. If you go there, you're going to find access to all kinds of tips and videos and links to 2 sets of workshops for the spring and for the fall for improving your garden. But most important, this is why I really want you to go there because it involves a sponsor of today's episode. At soullyrested.com/soil, you are going to find the absolute best soil amendment that you could use, in my opinion. It gives very literally a new spark to the microbiome of your soil, feeding the good stuff in your soil, just like if you're drinking kombucha to feed the good stuff in your gut. This amendment is going down into the soil and feeding the good microbiome. And as soon as the ground is not quite so frozen, am going to be putting this amendment on all of my beds. I do every spring. And you can take 15% off. Just go to soullyrested.com/soil for that coupon code and the information about this amazing amendment. I also should tell you, you might want to do a soil test. I don't think I'm going to do one this year, but soil tests are so important if you're growing your own food. We actually grew some of our own wheat last year. That was super fun. But a soil test is going to help you know if you're lacking in anything before you plant for the spring. So both the soil test and this amendment that I love are linked at soullyrested.com/soil. You can get both of them at 15% off. Go check out the discount and try these amazing products. I cannot recommend them enough. I can't tell you how much they have up-leveled my gardens. Okay, so let's get back to talking about that study. I have to pull open my notes here. It was a study done way back in the 1970s. I haven't found anything similar since, so I always go back to this reference. If anyone listening knows of more detailed, more recent studies about things like this, please message me because I would love to read about them. But I honestly don't think it's something that, most people want to pay for these studies because it's usually big food doing the studies, right? I don't know, but it's pretty interesting. It's mind-blowing. By the way, I'm drinking, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm drinking some of my sap. I'm almost finished my glass. I told you it's sugar season. One of my favorite things about sugar season is drinking the sap straight out of the tree. I mean, anytime you can have food directly from nature, and this stuff is so good. It has a natural sweetness. It's about 2%, 2.5% sugar. So it's a very light natural sweetness. It's cold coming from out of the bucket from beside the tree. I just went and got it before the episode. And the tree is a natural filter, taking out any impurities. So this just makes me, I'm telling you all this because I mean, this is real drink, real food, right? Just like the wheat berries. Last year when we grew some of our own wheat berries and then we milled them and turned them into cookies all within the same day, it was just thrilling. Like that's real food. Okay, I got way sidetracked. Sorry guys. Back to the study in the 1970s. They took how many groups? 5 groups of rats, and they fed them different types of flour and flour products for 4 generations of these different groups of rats. And groups 1 and 2 only ate stone ground flour made with stone ground, I'm sorry, or products made with stone ground flour. And they had the whole bran, germ, and endosperm all together. Okay, so that's groups 1 and 2. Group 3 consumed that same stone ground flour, but after the flour had aged for a couple weeks. Group 4 consumed the same aged stone ground flour as group 3, but they had that flour processed into flour products. So they didn't eat the flour directly, but in products that were made from it. And then group 5, that one consumed only refined white flour and products made with it. After 4 generations of rats, scientists found them to be almost completely infertile, except for groups 1 and 2. So only the ones that had the fresh stone ground flour for their food and their nutrients are the only ones that were not infertile. Scientists believe that 4 generations of rats is pretty much equivalent to about 100 human years. Guess what? It's been about 100 human years. I mean, more than that because it was 1880 that or the steel mill was invented. I don't know. It was early 1900s when the white flour was on the store shelves. So it has been not too much more than 100 years of human years since we've been eating everything that groups 3, 4, and 5 of the rats that were studied, what they were eating. Same idea. So I'm not saying that over the course of 4 generations, we've developed the health problems we have, like the infertility problem that's through the roof, just because of the refined flour we eat. But there has to be at least some correlation in my mind between our overall health that has declined greatly as a nation, including our obesity. Maybe that's another episode I could do because there's an amazing correlation between fresh ground flour and healthy weight. So, yeah, I'm just making a mental note. That's something else I should do an episode on. Let me know, by the way, guys. Reach out to me and let me know what else you want to know about fresh flour because there's so many things we could talk about. Um, but I mean, there's got to be a correlation, right, between our declined overall health as a nation and the nutrient vacuum in our flour. Like our flour pretty much has no nutrients. Um, in 1 century, so just 100 years of consuming only refined flour, I believe we have impacted our health very detrimentally. On the flip side, I also believe, just imagine what another 100 years of home milling could do for our kids and our grandkids and the future generations. So if this really is a revolution that's starting, and I know it sounds kind of funny I'm using that word, but I honestly do feel that way. Like we really can be rebels with our flour. We can turn our noses up at big food and say, we don't need your dead crap that you take the good stuff and sell it to make seed oils, which is more bad stuff for us. Instead, I'm just going to make my own. Thank you. Um, I do feel like 100 years of revolting the opposite direction could have huge impacts in improving our nation's health. So, anyway, that's just my little soapbox. But um, so I had planned on talking now about the enriched process, why we started enriching our flour and what that looked like. And some people say, well, it's enriched. Yeah, they took out 2 parts of it so it would be shelf stable, but they added back in the good nutrients. So we're fine. I was going to get into that and why that is not true and tell you just a little bit more about my own history with fresh flour. But I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking, you know what? I'm going to save that for next week because, like I said, there's so many things we could talk about. It's such an interesting topic. Um, so let's dive into that in next week's episode why enriched flour became a thing and why it's still just plain old dead flour. So I'm just going to leave you with this idea, with this thought. Our homes and our kitchens are seemingly insignificant tabletop little grain mills. They're a battleground. And guys, we can change the world 1 cup of fresh milled flour at a time. I think we can. So let's learn together how to revolutionize our family's health while eating delicious breads and baked goods. So go check out all the information about Fresh Flower University at soulyrested.com/mill. While you're there, check out over $1,000 worth of giveaways. I should have started the whole episode telling you about that because you don't want to miss these. So many exciting giveaways going on over the next few weeks. And there's also details there. It's a link to my guide to choosing a grain mill, helping you understand what questions to ask to choose the right grain mill for you. So go to soulyrested.com/mill for all those details. I think that's what I'm going to stop with. And I can't wait till next week. So thanks for listening, friends. Remember, it's easy to forget how blessed we are to live this life, but God has given us a gift of time in manageable units called days. And He's given us this amazing gift of a tiny little wheat berry loaded with 40 of the 44 essential nutrients that our body needs. So, every day we have a chance to mill some wheat berries and we have a chance to begin again and we have a chance to enjoy the simple everyday efforts. It's not easy, but it's a good life.